Hello, welcome back to the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much for being here. If you're new around here, please make sure to hit the subscribe button at some point during this video, as we see that we have plenty of you guys that haven't subscribed yet. We appreciate you tuning in. Today we're bringing a top 10 of the best Wonder Kids for you guys to keep an eye out during Copa America. We're all going to be watching it, I'm assuming. So straight to the point, Braden. And by the way, guys, we did it in U23, okay? That's the Olympic eligible age, so we can somehow try to include some Americans here. But in 10th place, Braden, who do you have out there?
Yeah, and also we just did it like that because if you were just going to go based off teenagers, there's a couple very high-profile ones that you'll hear us talk about, but outside of that, I don't know, making a top 10 would be a little difficult, especially since we both actually have completely different top 10 lists. So 20 different players you'll get to hear us talk about, and I'm actually going to start with 3 honorable mentions because I think there's so many talented Wonder Kids, or I guess young players, to watch this tournament, and it was really difficult to make a top 10. So just quickly going through a couple honorable mentions. I'll start with Josimar Alcocer from Costa Rica, 19-year-old winger, plays for Westerlo, actually plays left wing. Griffin Yao from the Olympic team for the US, for all our American viewers, plays on the right wing, but he does play right wing for his country. Alcocer does. Just scored his first goal in a World Cup qualifier about 2 weeks ago, and he should be a starter at Copa America. Costa Rica have a lot of young players on the roster. They have the most eligible players for this requirement out of any country at the tournament, so they're going to be ones to watch. Second honorable mention, Jose Cordoba. He's a center back, barely makes the age cut because he just turned 23 about 2 weeks ago or so. Also just signed for Norwich City, where he'll play with obviously USMNT striker Josh Sargent. And he's a locked-in starter for Panama. I would say he has a pretty good case for being their best defender, despite being so young. And if they have any chance at advancing to the knockout stage in a pretty tough group, a top-heavy group, he's going to have to be excellent and lock down some of the best forwards in the tournament, like obviously we know Pulisic and Darwin Nunez. And then the other one, Dario Osorio. I would have included him in the top 10, the Chilean winger, but I am a little bit concerned about his health status. He's a 20-year-old winger, plays for Midtjylland, and he had a great first season at the club, 8 goals and 2 assists. And I think, in my opinion, he's easily Chile's most exciting prospect. However, he did end up getting injured and missed their most recent friendly, their only tune-up friendly against Paraguay, which they won 3-0. So I think because of that, and the manager, Gareca, might just play it safe and have him on the bench, even though he did score his first international goal in March against France, of all teams. Pretty impressive feat there. So if he was a locked-in starter, I'd have him in the top 10. But I think he deserves a mention regardless. And now, with that out of the way, getting on to my number 10, it's a player who I guarantee a lot of people have not heard of, Miguel Terceros from Bolivia. He's one of the only bright Bolivian talents. I think it's fair to say they probably have the worst roster in the tournament, but he's a 20-year-old cam who plays for Santos in Brazil. He's made 9 first-team appearances for them, usually plays with the U20s though, and he just scored his first Bolivia goal actually in one of their tune-up friendlies against Ecuador. And for me, I think he's the future of their national team, for better or for worse. I think he's definitely the most talented youngster they have, and I wanted to include a couple players in here that might be playing leading roles, because there's a lot better players that we're going to leave out that will be, but they might not start. Like, for example, Gabriel Martinelli for Brazil is eligible for this list, and he's probably better than 9 out of 10 of the players I'll mention, but he's not going to have an extended role for Brazil, so I didn't include him or other players like that. Terceros, I think, could have a pretty big role for Bolivia. He's a wild card off the bench, even if he doesn't start. And if they do have any slight chance at surprising people in this tournament, he's going to be at the center of it.
Yeah, and he has looked good when he played for Santos. Hasn't really had that many opportunities, so it's nice for him to be trusted by the Bolivia manager, and I think that he's definitely going to be in the center of action if they do surprise some people. I'm also going with a player that doesn't play for a high-caliber nation right here, probably the 2 worst nations historically in South America, Bolivia and Peru. I'm going with a Peruvian. Jesus Castillo plays for Gil Vicente in Liga de Portugal and does really well there, honestly. A very, very respectable career so far. When he was at Sporting Sporting Cristal. He actually had the opportunity to move to Brazil. He had some clubs sniffing around for him. As we know, Brazilian clubs tend to prey on talent from other countries because they are financially superior. But he made the bridge to Europe, does quite well there, playing week in, week out for Gil Vicente. I think it's a very respectable level for him to be playing at. And I think that Peru, as they showed, they are above the level of CONCACAF nations, but not above the level of any CONMEBOL nations. So they slapped around some islands here and there, and he was at the center of it, did really well. So hey, maybe he'll be friends with Jesus Ferreira someday, part of the Caribbean there. But yeah, he's my 10th pick right here. Wanted to show some love to these players that will likely go unnoticed, but play a big part for their countries, as you said, Braden. Now moving on to the 9th position.
Yeah, number 9, I'm going to go for a type of player that you rarely ever see for club or country. Jalen Mitchell, a 19-year-old center back for Costa Rica who is already a locked-in starter for his club, Alajuelense in Costa Rica, who are one of the biggest clubs in the country, and also a starter for the national team. Despite only having 12 international minutes under his belt coming into their tune-up friendlies this month in June, he became a starter immediately, played all 3 games, got 3 clean sheets in all of them, including against St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada in World Cup qualifying. 2 huge wins for them if they want to qualify for the tournament and at least get to the next stage. And against Uruguay, it was their C team, but it's still an impressive feat. And he won man of the match in that game as well. As a 19-year-old center back to be doing that, regardless of the opposition, I think is very impressive. And I do think this could be his breakout tournament where he could potentially earn a move to Europe. We've seen a couple other young Costa Rican ballers, Brendan Aguilera in particular, earn a move to Europe recently. So I think Jalen Mitchell could be one of the next ones. And like I said, Costa Rica has so many young players. They're going to be at least a team to watch from that perspective this tournament.
Yeah, and again, I think we're going with teams that are kind of in the same level, same bracket right here. I'm going with a Jamaican right now, Karoy Zidane Anderson. He has done quite well for Charlton, and I really rate him. I think he's a baller. Anytime I see him playing, I think that a little bit similar to Musa, lacks in the end product, but a really good player, comfortable on the ball. And I think that this Jamaica squad, if they put it together, they should have more than enough talent to get out of that group. Honestly, on paper, they should get out of that group. But you never know. That's the most unpredictable group. But if they are to get out, I think that Karoy is going to play a big part in it. Hopefully he does, as he's been getting more minutes with the national team. Moving on to the 8th place.
For number 8, I'm actually going to pick a Jamaican back-to-back, just like you did. And it's going to be Dexter Lembikisa, the 20-year-old right back who plays for Wolves. Technically plays for Wolves, but he doesn't actually play for them. Was loaned out to Rotherham in the Championship for the first half of the season, and then went to Hearts in Scotland, one of the second-tier teams behind Celtic and Rangers in that league for the second half of the year, which was his first professional season. And I thought, all things considered, he did pretty well, especially at Hearts when he was there. He had a little bit of a rough go at Rotherham. They were struggling, ended up getting relegated, although he wasn't there when they did that, so you can't really blame him for that. And I thought he really came into form at the end of the season. He's already a starter for Jamaica at right back, which you could argue underlies their defensive issues, but I think he's a pretty good player with high upside. And he even scored his first international goal in the Nations League third place game against Panama back in March, which won the game for Jamaica. That was the only goal. And like you said, they have a lot of attention around them. There's a lot of hype around, especially the Premier League attackers that they have or don't have in the case of Leon Bailey. But I do think Lembikisa shouldn't be overlooked, and Karoy Anderson as well, like you said. They have some solid youngsters up and coming, and even a couple that didn't make the squad. But Jamaica's future is bright. It's not all just English dual mats that can't cut it for the England national team. There's some real talent up and coming.
Yeah, let's hope for that. It would be nice to see that for a change. And I'm going right here with a complete change right here. I'm going for a player that I think we kind of tailored this list so he could be in it. It's going to be Joel Scally. And I know putting Joe Scally as a wonder kid may not resonate well with some people, but it is U23. He's eligible here in this top 10, so I'm going to find all bias that I have in me to include an American, and I think that Joe has shown that, he surprised all of us with really great showings. Maybe some people were backing him, but I'll hold my hands up. I wasn't expecting him to shut down Luis Diaz and Vini Jr. the way that he did. Props to him, a pat in the back, and I think that he's going to be a huge going to play a pivotal role for the U.S. if we are to go far in this tournament. So I'm going to put him right here because in terms of relevance and how relevant he's going to be to the team, so hopefully he helps us have a memorable run. Have Joe Scally here in 8th. Now moving on to 7th, a little bit higher up in the rankings.
Yeah, I mean, there's 8 U23 eligible players on the US M&T team, and if you look at the quality of them, Scally might be towards the bottom, but if you look at the importance to the team for this tournament, I think he's arguably number 2 behind another player that you'll probably hear later in the list. But for my number 7, I'm another CONCACAF player, Ismail Kone, the 2002 born center mid for Watford, who just turned 22 a couple days ago. So happy belated birthday to him. And I think he's been one of Canada's brightest prospects for several years now. Broke out with Montreal in the MLS a couple years ago and earned himself a move to Watford, where he did struggle a little bit in his first year adjusting to the play in the championship, but he emerged as a starter this past season, getting 4 goals and 3 assists from the midfield. Him and Eustáquio for Canada are the midfield, and it's only a 2-man, which means they have a lot of work to do. And it means that Koenig has to be all over the pitch if they're going to have a good performance. And he did that recently in their 0-0 draw against France, playing up to the level of world-class center mids that he was playing against. So I thought that was very encouraging. He's been on the rise for a while now, one of Canada's top prospects, and I think he's going to have a pretty good tournament.
All right, moving on from these players that maybe some people aren't too familiar with, apart from Scally, I'm going to go with perhaps the highest profile player in this list. I'm wearing the Brazil jersey. This kid is everywhere. It's Endrick. Maybe some people think this is criminally low for him to be here on this list, but I've watched Endrick a lot when I was in Brazil. Also on TV, I watched a lot of competitions that are for youth people in Brazil because my brother played in some of them. And I'll be honest, I don't think that Endrick's game and physicality really translates that well to the highest level. Granted, he seems to be inevitable with, I'm not going to call it luck, just going to say destiny, that he has scored and performed really well for the national team. But the fact is, for Palmeiras in the Paulistão, he has scored less than Gabriel Jesus when he was there, arguably played less convincing performances than Gabriel Jesus when he was in Brazil. So I don't really rate him as high as some people do, but I think that he will probably shine. He's the only 9 Brazil, really the traditional 9 that they called up, so a lot of pressure is going to be on his shoulders. Now, why I have him so down on the list, because I don't think Brazil are going to do as well as people expect, or maybe some people are already calling it out. I don't think they're going to have a good run at all, but I think that Endrick will still justify some of the hype around him. And yeah, I'm part Brazilian, so I'll try to wrap that, even though it sounds weird, really. But moving on right here to 6th place, Braden.
Yeah, number 6 going to, like you said, a player who I think a lot more people will know and recognize, Julio Enciso, the 20-year-old from Paraguay, who plays for Brighton and came into relevance really with his 3rd place finish in last year's Puskas Award for his thunderbolt against Manchester City. What a strike that was. He has unfortunately struggled with injuries this season, but he did still get 2 assists on the year and had 4 goals and 3 assists the previous season, where he was nominated for the Puskas, which was also his first season with Brighton. And it's a huge step up, going from playing in Paraguay to going to the Premier League for a team as good as Brighton. I mean, we know how amazing their youth prospect scouting is, and even their academy as well. So if they sign a youth player, better believe that they're going to end up being good. And I believe the same for Enciso. It's really going to be down to him and Miguel Almiron, MLS legend from Atlanta United. Maybe he could even be coming back, who knows, but it's going to be those 2. If they create anything in this tournament, and they have odds stacked up against them, going against Colombia and Brazil in the group, as well as Costa Rica, of course, if they have any chance of getting out, those 2 are going to be absolutely crucial, and they're going to need to have the tournaments of their life. So I have to pick Enciso here because he's paramount to his nation's success.
Absolutely. Perhaps the most crucial one to a nation's success so far on the list. I'm going to move right here to one that I also, it's a huge contrast because I don't think he's going to play that much of a part. And he's already a somewhat established player. It's Garnacho. Everyone knows Garnacho. Everyone knows who he is. Hasn't really had much space with Argentina. So the reason why I'm picking him is because I think that this tournament could really present himself. He could present himself to the Argentinian fans because they don't have that much of a connection with him. He's a huge CR7 fan. Admittedly hadn't gone to Argentina until he got his first call up, so there is a bit of a lack in connection there, but I think that he might just get some minutes here and there and prove to himself or to the fans that he is Argentinian for sure and a de facto player worthy of a call up. So I think that he's one of the best teams, favorites to get a really favorable run to the final. He's bound to get at least a goal contribution here, and I think that for him this is a really important tournament. So now breaking into your top 5, Braden.
At number 5, well, I mentioned earlier, Costa Rica have the most U23 players of this tournament by far, having 11. So I think it's only right that I have 2 of them in my final list. And I'm going to pick for number 5, Manfredo Galde, the 22-year-old striker who I think is probably their best player now, especially that Keylor Navas announced his retirement unexpectedly. He was so good for Twente in the Eredivisie, but then made the interesting decision to sign for Spartak Moscow in January, where he has underwhelmed in Russia, only scoring 1 goal so far since signing for them, but it hasn't impacted his Costa Rica form at all. He had a goal and 3 assists in their 2 World Cup qualifying games at the start of June. And he also scored their only goal in a friendly against Argentina, the favorites for this tournament, the holders of the tournament, World Cup champions, of course, back in March. So he is their star man now. And if Costa Rica, kind of similar to Enciso with Paraguay, but I think even more on a higher level, if Costa Rica have any success in this tournament, it's going to be because Ugalde shows up.
All right, now I actually move to a player that has that sort of relevance for his nation, and a nation that I think could just face the player that I picked on the last position is going to be Piero Hincapié. I really, really rate him. I think everyone who has seen the team that's Bayern, they did so well throughout the season, avoiding defeat so many times, and I think that he really showed that. It was actually props to him for an Ecuadorian to move to Europe that young and play that huge of a role in a position that is crucial for that defensive system. I think that he's going to do really well with Ecuador. I think that they should have no issues really in the group stage. Now what they do from then on, I don't know, but if they do anything relevant, he's going to be a part of it. So in 5th place, showing a defender some love.
Yeah, number 4. It's funny you go for Hincapié there because I'm actually going to go for another Ecuadorian defender at number 4, William Pacho from Eintracht Frankfurt, the 22-year-old center back who played and started 44 games for Frankfurt this season, which was his first year at the club. And honestly, despite him being so new to the team, I think he was probably their 2nd best player, which is saying a lot. A lot of the attention around Ecuador goes to some of their other big name players who are also eligible. Like you said, Hincapié and Moises Caicedo as well is technically U23 eligible, but in my opinion, he's surpassed the WONDERKIDS status. He's an established player. I think he's, the most expensive transfer in Premier League history. He's too good for this list. But William Pacho, I think, goes under the radar, and it's kind of criminal because he's a huge part of their success. They've only conceded 3 goals in their first 6 World Cup qualifying games, which is tied for 2nd best behind Argentina, of course. And I think if William Pacho, along with Hincapié and the rest of their excellent defense, are on their A game, Ecuador are the kind of team that are capable, despite not having as many goals in their team as some other nations. They're the type of team that's capable of knocking out the big boys. They're a dark horse kind of team. Whether they actually do that and take down Argentina, I don't think they will. But if anyone has the capability to do it outside of the top tier nations, I think it is Ecuador, and Pacho is a huge part of that.
All right, continuing with the Ecuadorian trend right here, I'm going for a true wonder kid. A true wonder kid, just like Endrick. It's going to be Kendry Paes. Kendry is a really, really talented player. I think everyone has seen that at his time with Independiente del Valle. If you look at the highlights, it's very impressive with the national team as well last match. And I think that even though I have my doubts on what heights he's going to achieve during his career because of some of the off-the-field issues that he's already had with that squad, I think that he's a really, really promising player, really exciting to watch, nice to watch, really progressive, direct with the ball, and skilled with both feet. So really nice player to watch. I think that, again, he benefits from being in a really good group of players. Seems to be a perfect generation for them to have a signature tournament, which Ecuador hasn't had in a really long time. So he's my pick right here. Not as high as maybe I had it initially, but I'm going to justify it with my next ones. Now, who's your next player, Braden?
Yeah, jumping into the top 3 now, I had to have a USMNT player in this list somewhere, especially considering how many pretty solid players we have in this U23 eligibility. And I ended up deciding to go for Johnny Cardoso, 22-year-old CDM who signed for Real Betis from Internacional in Brazil in January, and he hit the ground running in La Liga, started 15 of 17 matches that he played, and even contributed a goal and 2 assists from the 6th position, which is pretty rare output from that sort of position on the pitch. I think he could be in for extended minutes at Copa America, maybe more than he was expecting due to his impressive club form, like I mentioned already, but also the uncertain fitness status of Tyler Adams. We know he did play a little bit in one of the tune-up friendlies for the USA, but I think there's still a lot of questions as to whether he is truly 100%. We saw him come back against Mexico in the Nations League final, and score an absolute screamer, and then he ended up being injured for basically the rest of the season. So I don't think rushing him back too quickly would be a good idea, and because of that, Johnny is the natural replacement to step in for him. I think he'll start 1 or 2 games at the least in this tournament, and he'll have a crucial role in the team. If the USMNT go far, depth is going to be important, as for every team that wants to make a run, and having Johnny as a potential starter or even a backup option in the midfield is pretty crucial. And if he has a good tournament, he could very well stake his claim to be the regular starter finally at the 6th position for the USMNT heading into, of course, the home World Cup in 2026.
From one center defensive midfielder to another, I have Ugarte as my next pick right here. I really rate him. I think he's a really good player. As we've said, but it seems to be the trend with Uruguayan players. They are so passionate, always putting everything on the line for their country. You gotta love Uruguay. I think everyone, apart from Argentinians perhaps, really likes them. And I think that they have a really strong chance of perhaps going all the way. So since he's in that type of squad, and I think that they have not a favorable path, but they have a path that they probably fancy themselves to reach the final. I think Ugarte is going to play a huge role, especially if they get into the later stages, because traditionally Uruguay don't mind bunkering. They don't mind playing with all of the bodies getting on the line, and I think that Ugarte really embodies that Uruguayan mentality. So I have him breaking into my top 3. Now moving on to your second best player to watch in this list, Braden.
My list wouldn't be complete without a Brazilian who, like I said with the example of Martinelli already, if this list was based on quality, they'd make up probably over half of it, but it's not. But I'm still going to pick one because I think Lucas Beraldo, the 20-year-old center back who just signed for French Giants PSG from his boyhood club Sao Paulo in January, is going to be a crucial player for Brazil at this tournament. Almost instantly became a starter for PSG, partnering with Marquinhos, just like he'll probably do with the national team this summer at Copa America. And despite being so young, I think he has a pretty good chance to actually start. It seemed to be that the backups played against Mexico in their junior friendlies and the starters played against the USA. And it was Beraldo who got the nod against the United States over Champions League winner Eder Militao, Premier League team of the season Gabriel, Serie A team of the season, and potentially best defender in the whole league, Bremer. It's very good competition to be starting ahead of, especially as a 20-year-old with only half a season in Europe under his belt. I think he's gone a long way in a very short amount of time, and if Brazil are going to have a good tournament, they're going to need to be rock solid at the back, especially considering the quality of some of the other attackers that they'll be going against, like Luis Diaz with Colombia, potentially Pulisic with the USA, Darwin Nunez for Uruguay, who they could potentially be facing in the quarterfinals or semis. Their center backs are going to need to be rock solid, and I think Beraldo is up to the task.
I will say, and it's not just my opinion, I think that Dorival is being really biased starting Beraldo right here. He worked with him at São Paulo, so there's probably that connection there. He said that he's a great kid. But anyways, moving on to my next pick right here, it's going to be Pelistri. I think that going from a manager that has perhaps had a teacher's pet, and Beraldo, a guy that I think has been really hard done by in every decision with United. I think he has shown in his loan spell that he's a good player and can create something out of nothing. And especially on that wing depth, which seems to be the weakest position for Uruguay, I think that he has stepped up lately. And I think with the attack that they have, especially with Darwin, it's a type of player that suits Pelistri's game style. And then there's also the experience they have all around. He won't have to do that much defensive work in theory because they are so stacked in midfield. So I think that he will have the fluidity to show his best level. And again, I back Uruguay to perhaps go all the way. They have a really good squad, so I have to pick one of their players right here that's high up on the list. Now moving on to your player that needs to be the watch the most, Braden, who is it?
Yeah, I don't think our USMNT audience is going to like this one, but my number 1 is also the oldest player on my list, coincidentally, but I think he's the most intriguing for this tournament. It's going to be 23-year-old striker from Feyenoord, Santiago Jimenez, of course, from Mexico. Scored 23 goals and got 2 assists in his first season at the club in 22-23, and followed up this past season with 26 goals, 8 assists. We know how incredible he's been in the Eredivisie, but the one key thing for him is that he's been very underwhelming for Mexico in the past. He did score the goal that won them the Gold Cup last summer, which was a nice moment for him, but outside of that, he has struggled for minutes, he's struggled for form, even gets benched for Henry Martin usually, but it seems like Mexico are paving the way for him to be Finally, the starting striker for this tournament, Henry Martin, like I said, has been starting over him, isn't even in the squad. A couple of other options who were competing also didn't make the squad. It seems to be a real point of emphasis for them that Santi is his time to be the guy, and I think there's going to be a huge pressure on his shoulders. I mean, we know how storied Mexico are as a nation, and they're in a pretty difficult group. Not necessarily star quality in these teams. I don't think there's a title contender in Group B, but there's a lot of teams that could make the argument to get out of the group. It's one of the most difficult to predict, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mexico to get out. And not to mention as well, this is his audition this summer for the big Premier League teams that are interested in him. We've seen interest from Arsenal. We've seen interest from Tottenham. I'm sure there's others as well that I'm forgetting right now. Chelsea have probably submitted a bid because they submit a bid for everyone who has a pulse. But this is his audition. I mean, he's proved it in the Eredivisie. Can he now prove it in a huge international tournament with all the pressure on him to be the star man finally for Mexico that he hasn't been able to do in the past? I think he's the number one wonder kid U23 player to watch in this tournament for that reason.
Yeah, perhaps now that you've put him in first, I wasn't expecting. That's true. I think the fate of his nation's in his hands, or in his feet, really. I think that you can make a case for that. Going from a decision that maybe some of the USMNT hardcores don't like to the ones that they really love. I put Gio Reyna right here in first, put all of my bias into play. And I think that Gio, honestly, not similar to Santi, but this is the first major tournament that he's going to play a vital role for the U.S. I think that now him and Greg have said that they put what's in the past, and it seems to have progress and moved on from that. He has been starting for us. I think that in our A squad, our strongest 11, he would start for in anyone's opinion, but he also managed to do that in Greg's opinion now, however tough that may be. So I think that he's going to play a huge part, especially with the more defensive duties that he's been doing lately, being sacrificed really as a left center mid, and he has been doing that well. So props to Gio. I think that we all back the USMNT to eventually punch above our weight and have a signature win, signature tournament, and dream about this and give us something to root for leading up to 26. And he's a crucial part of that cycle, as some may say, arguably one of the highest ceiling players we ever had. So I'm going to put Gio right here. Hopefully he proves me right and does become the best U23 player in this tournament. But that's it for today. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this far into the list. Let us know down in the comments below who are the players that you're going to be watching the most. Any of these players that you didn't really know of and are more interested and we'll keep an eye out, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.